As we work out modalities to bring on our first guest to talk about Ghana's DDEP program, that is the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. We'll pen that for a while and look at our second conversation that has to do with Zambia rejecting World Bank's participation in the debt restructuring talks. So Zambia's finance minister, that is Tumbeko Musokotwane, was recently quoted to have rejected a call from China for the World Bank and other multilateral lenders to join a restructuring of the country's debt, one in that delays were holding up the economy. Now, in a rebuttal, however, the minister clarified, saying he did not reject China's call for multilateral banks to offer debt relief, but only criticized debt restructuring delays. The West African country is racing to finish a restructuring of about $13 billion of external debt this year. Zambia became the first African country to default in the COVID-19 era in 2020, but the restructuring of its external debt of over $15 billion with creditors, including China and Eurobond holders, has been greatly delayed. Government data showed Zambia owed Chinese creditors nearly $6 billion of the total external debt at the end of 2021. So joining me this morning to discuss this is Chishala Kateka, an economist and president, New Heritage Party Zambia, from, of course, Lusaka, Zambia. Thank you so much for joining me. Good morning. Now, in some publications, Zambia was said to be owing about $15 billion in external debt, while others said Zambia is owing about $17 billion. I'd like you to just put this in proper perspective. Let's have the exact figures that the country is owing and how that is affecting the country's economy and, of course, our government's expenditure.
Actually, it is 17. It is $17 billion, not 15. That Zambia owes external creditors.
So how is it affecting the economy, so to speak, and of course spendings?
Yeah, so as we were making payments towards the debt, so for about 50% of our expenditure was going towards public administration, so salaries and things like that. And then 40% was going towards paying debt. And then only 10% is what we were able to spend in other sectors. So it's been very, very rough. It's been extremely, extremely rough for the country because clearly social services were suffering. Hospitals, as you may have heard, we don't seem to have medicines in hospitals and things like that. So social service delivery has been greatly impacted.
Well, Zambia seems to be disgruntled now about the delays in the debt restructuring because China had called for the World Bank to participate and other multilateral lenders to also participate in the restructuring talks. And even the U.S. Treasury Secretary, that is Janet Yellen, came out to say that it seems as though China is full dragging on the process. So would you say that that allegation or speculation is valid? And if so, to what end?
I think that people, there's been this push to cast China as the bad guy on the block. China as the people that are holding us back and everything. However, I think let me just give a brief background of the relationship between Zambia and China. Way back when China was not on the Security Council at the UN, it was Zambia and Tanzania that pushed for them to get there, which they are now sitting on, and they've never forgotten that. So in the eyes of China, to China, Zambia's president, former president, the first president, was very, very close with the Chinese at the time. And as a result of that, China sees Zambia in a very, very good light. And so what they have been trying to do is not to sabotage Zambia. The amount that we owe them in their books are really, really tiny amounts relative to where China sits. So we've seen this geopolitical situation playing out in Zambia, but really relating to the US and China, as opposed to Zambia and China. You know, Zambia, I think that you yourself mentioned the fact that our Minister of Finance quickly rebutted that appeared in the Financial Times. He said that he was misquoted, the headline was misleading, and the Ministry of Finance also welcomed the correction, which was later made by the Financial Times, which stated, and I quote, "Minister did not reject a Chinese call to include multilateral lenders in the debt restructuring as originally implied." So there was a misquoting of that story. Headline.
Of course, it is nice for him to have come out to clarify that, to set the record straight.
Yeah.
But then we know that China is the largest creditor to several African countries when it comes to providing loans for them to meet their financial obligations. But then it's becoming a commonplace for African countries to receive these loans and not pay back. So why is that trend common with African countries?
I think we should be looking at our national leadership across Africa that we have. I think we like to play the people that are at a disadvantage all the time, when it should not be like that. When you think about it, Africa is the richest continent that we have, and therefore we should not be as poor as we are. We should not be playing to the gallery that we are so poor we can't pay back, we borrow and then we can't pay back. I think the time has come for Africans to take a hold of this continent and begin to do the right thing for ourselves, the right thing for our people, and indeed to take our rightful positions on the world map. And part of the reason is because we bend over backwards when we are getting into certain deals with lenders, certain deals with investors. We always disadvantage our countries, and that is the reason why, so we borrow without plans. We borrow without even making plans that will ensure that we are able to pay back. I mean, look, even in our personal lives, when you borrow, you know where you're going to get the money to pay, to create an income stream that will ensure that you are able to pay back. It's the responsible thing to do.
I think that's one of the challenges of African countries who receive these loans and do not plug it in viable investments. We hope they get it right. But then some economists say that it is obvious that China is trying to protect its investments and ensure that Zambia meets up with its obligation. And of course, Zambia is coming out to say that these talks and these bottlenecks, so to speak, is kind of impeding the restructuring process. Now, when it comes to discussions like this, what do you think should take prominence in determining the modalities for the process? Because we're looking at how Zambia needs to pay back, and on the other side, how the process will be fast-tracked. So when it comes to meeting up with this kind of obligation and seeing it to a success, who do you think should be dictating the pace to ensure that discussions come on board and it reaches a logical conclusion in time?
Okay. So there seems to be quite a lot of finger pointing that we are seeing in this process. So you have the US coming up and saying they have called on China to expedite China's commitment of concluding debt discussions with Zambia. Meanwhile, China is saying, look, 70% of Zambia's debt is dominantly from Western commercial lenders, and multilateral financial institutions, and that they should take responsibility to take stronger action to relieve the debt burden. So we see all these discussions going on and so on and so forth. But we are of the view that this is something that the creditors, it's in their best interest to expedite the position, the process, because then they'll be able to, if they expedite the process, they will be able to get their debt sooner, paid sooner rather than later. Of course, there are calls for all these creditors to take a haircut and on the loans, on the amounts owed. However, I'm sure they would still want to get their debt paid sooner rather than later. So as they go into this process of sitting down and having these discussions, I think all the parties, Zambia included, and all these lenders and the creditors should sit down and resolve the situation.
So when we have this kind of frostiness and clash of interests, how do you think it would affect these countries, most especially China and Zambia, and even other countries who are indebted to their creditors? And how do you think it would also affect their access to international financial markets in the future?
Well, firstly, it greatly affects our ability or capacity to borrow, because we are still in this situation. The delays would just mean that the countries affected are not able to go and borrow some more. If I was a creditor, I would think twice about lending as well. However, in terms of the relationship between Zambia and China, because the minister came out and clarified, the Chinese actually said, and I want to quote, as Zambia's friend, China attaches high importance to Zambia's concerns about the debt issue. China is the first international creditor that provided relief for Zambia and facilitated the success of 3 meetings of the creditor committee for Zambia as co-chair. He said that the urgent statement released by Zambia's Minister of Finance showed that the solid mutual trust and traditional friendship between China and Zambia actually let down those that are trying to put a wedge between Zambia and China. So it would appear that statement by the Minister of Finance has calmed the water, so to speak, in terms of the relationship between China and Zambia. So that was a good move by the Minister of Finance.
All right. Whether or not multilateral lenders and other creditors who feel aggrieved join in the restructuring process. Now, are there other options that you think Zambia can explore to see to the success of the reduction in the burden, in the debt burden of the country? Because, of course, it is affecting the government's purse, it is affecting its spending and affecting the economy. So are there other options that you think Zambia can explore?
Zambia, as well as many other African countries, have got billions worth of dollars buried in our ground, or not necessarily just minerals, but a whole lot of things that are going for us, and which I believe that we at the New Heritage Party believe that if we could begin to model our way of doing things, we would get a whole lot more than this begging bowl that we keep going out with. See, for example, Zambia is a copper mining industry. Country. We've got a lot of emeralds. We've got gold. We've got everything going for us. but we continue to do our mining in the same model as we inherited it from colonial days. And if you continue to do the same thing, you get the same results. When you sell copper on the London Metal Exchange, the outcome from there, the funding stays out there. So they only bring a little bit back for your salaries, and they don't pay you as well as they pay themselves. They bring a little bit back for taxes, which is under-declared anyway. They bring a little bit back for maintenance. So at the end of the day, we are gaining very little from our mineral resources. I'm of the firm view, I'm a Pan-Africanist, by the way. I'm of the firm view that the time has come for Africans to rethink the way we do things and what we sign away. We give a lot of tax benefits to these FDIs. They are investors, therefore they come, they invest, and they want to take their money back. So we need to rethink. I've seen a story in Botswana where the Botswana government is, they had a partnership which expired last year in September, but has been extended to June this year. And in that partnership with De Beers, initially they were only getting 10%, they went to 25%. And now they're saying, guys, 50%. We are not going to accept anything less than 50%. And they're saying, if you don't accept the 50%, we are walking. And we need to take more of such a stand, because the time has come surely for Africans to benefit from what rightly belongs to them.
Finally, before I let you go, Chishala, now that discussions are gathering momentum on the modalities to consider for the restructuring process, what do you think the likely fallout will be? What should we expect?
We are wondering whether the lenders, the creditors will agree to that haircut, or whether they will insist. So if there's a lot of people, of these creditors wanting to get what they put in, which is natural. However, considering the situation, if they insist that they need to get what they actually put in, and they'll not agree to that haircut, then we're going to have a protracted discussion, which means Zambia will take longer to get out of the situation that we are in, and with all the ramifications attached to that.
And the longer the delay, the longer the Zambian government will not be able to move ahead with its economic policies and, of course, its spendings.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Chishala. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks.